Please like and subscribe.
When you have quality storytellers and quality actors and people who are serious about their craft, you can create something really amazing.
Welcome to Galactic Initiative. I'm your host, Jeff. Joining me to discuss Andor is Grand Admiral Sean. Welcome, Sean.
Hello, my friend.
Andor Season 1. You and I rewatched it in preparation for Season 2 and this video, a review, and a look ahead. When we discussed how to cover it, we decided we would break Season 1 into story arcs. But let me ask, with the passage of years, since last you watched all 12 episodes, what stands out? What were your overall impressions of Season 1?
Things that stood out the most to me, one is the dialogue. Compared to all the other Star Wars TV shows that we got, just the dialogue was on another level. It was complex and intellectual. It didn't pander to the lowest common denominator. It didn't rely on tricks or weak humor. I mean, there was humor in it, but not simple jokes or slapsticky kind of stuff. The other thing, again, was the production values. Being on actual sets for almost the entire show, it shows up. It shows up in the background. It shows up, in the way that the characters are interacting with their environments. The look and the feel of the show, I mean, it looked like Star Wars. It felt like Star Wars on actual physical sets and not relying on the volume like the other shows do. I mean, yeah, there was some volume used in there, of course, but Ferrix, for example, like they built the whole town. None of that was relying on the volume, having stuff projected in the background to make your small set look bigger, and it really paid off. It gave so much depth to the show, and I think that's a word that I come back to a lot. It's a deep show, whether it's messaging, themes, characters, sets, and all that stuff, the lore of the universe of Star Wars, all those things. It's a deep show, and it really stands out, and especially after suffering through Acolyte and third season of Mando, Boba Fett, Book of Boba Fett, Skeleton Crew was a step up in a lot of ways from some of those shows, but still not the quality of Andor. So it really, again, it reinforced in my mind that when you have quality storytellers and quality actors and people who are serious about their craft, whether it be production design or script writing or whatever, that you can create something really amazing. And so that's the kind of stuff that stood out to me. Plot, story, dialogue, production value.
Let's dive deeper. First, acting. As I rewatched Season 1, I appreciated the performances more than ever before. Credit to the cast members and directors. I could relate to every cause and effect, every ambition, and every poor choice. The characters and circumstances were grounded, which turned off many potential viewers. I've heard people complain about Andor being overly analogous to the modern world. I disagree. For me, it balanced sci-fi adventure and real-world thriller. In fact, on the thriller side, it successfully incorporated several genres: espionage, heist, politics, and prison break. The script was excellent, but the cast members elevated the entire production. Say a few words about the acting in Andor.
Well, I mean, we could just start with Luthen, right? The character of Luthen and the performance in that role. You're actually getting two or three characters depending on where Luthen is in his machinations of the rebellion, right? Whether he's dealing with Mon Mothma, or whether he's dealing with Cassian himself, or whether he's dealing with Saw Gerrera. Like every time he's on screen, he has almost a different personality, right? Because he's manipulating these people. He's manipulating all these other characters to achieve an end for himself. And probably the most honest Luthen that we get is when he's giving the speech about sacrificing everything. But just the nuance of the performance, the scene where he's on his ship and he's putting on the wig and putting the rings on, and he puts on that affectation of the art dealer. Like, he doesn't say anything. It's all conveyed through facial expression, and through physical control, right? The way that his arms are moving and his posture and like all these things, and his interactions when he's with Mon Mothma in the shop, it conveys an intensity that it's subtle in a way. I mean, it's intense, but it's subtle. And it's just that type of a performance. And then, Mon Mothma is also, this woman who is hiding in plain sight, a respected politician that everybody thinks is kind of a do-gooder or whatever, but she's fomenting rebellion in the background. And you can just feel the pressure and the stress and how she's being crushed and how she's being backed into a corner and has no options, and that cornered animal intensity of self-preservation. And it all comes out in these wonderfully banal conversations about table settings and having too many tequila shots at a diplomatic function, and and who's going to pick the kids up after school. Like, it is just, again, a very layered performance, a lot of emotional intensity going on, and then again, all the other characters, all the supporting actors and actresses. I mean, everybody on Aldhani, the heist crew, were all amazing performances. All of the Imperial officers and all that stuff, believable. Like, you get the believability of the boredom of oppression. These guys are these basically colonial oppressors that are on this planet dealing with what they consider to be a primitive culture, and the disdain that they have for it, but then the sheer boredom, right? They're out there crushing the universe, eradicating civilizations, cultures, languages, peoples, from these planets that they deem are necessary for whatever their imperial work is. And they go about it in such a technocratical way that they're actually bored, and guys are like, I just need to get off this planet, or I don't want to work a full shift today. Like, again, it takes, and some of this comes from the writing, of course, but these characters are playing, they're playing these totalitarian fascists in such a way that, with Denise Gow and Dedra Miro's character, like at the beginning of the series, you're rooting for her. She is the most SS clone amalgam that you're going to get on screen, right? The whole speech that her boss gives about how we're in the business of healthcare, right? We identify symptoms and we treat diseases or whatever. And yet, even though they're having these conversations, and even though she's a brutal torturer and just a committed ideologue for this fascist regime, you're rooting for her to get ahead at work. It's really intense that these characters can create these scenarios for the viewers where, you're so invested in what's going on with them that you can feel the pressure, you can feel the stress, you can feel the fear, you can, and then you can also, in weird ways, identify with Dedra and Cyril. It's like, anybody who's ever had an overbearing mom is like totally rooting for Cyril to get ahead, yet he is a fascist, right? And he is a zealot. He wants to be in the regime, and he can't. He wants to be a part of the imperial machine, the network, the oppression. Like, that's his aspirational goal. And you're like, man, I hope he gets that, because then he doesn't have to live with that mom of his. He doesn't have to eat that blue cereal anymore. It's amazing what is being conveyed to the audience, to where you can empathize and sympathize with characters that you're supposed to hate. And then you can also kind of question some characters that you're supposed to love, right? Or you're supposed to root for because they're, air quotes, the good guys, right? And that's what's going to wind up, I believe, being a core piece of the storytelling in season 2, is we're going to see, we've already seen how kind of shady Cassian really is. And we've also seen how shady he is, of course, at the beginning of Rogue One. But we're going to see how he got from minor street hustler shady to shoot a guy in the back in the alleyway shady in season 2. And it's like, we're going to again be exposed to these great performances and these great characters and these great stories, and we're going to find ourselves in sort of these uncomfortable positions as the audience, because we're going to be looking at some of these people and saying, I know I should really be rooting for this person, but I don't feel comfortable doing that. And then conversely, you'll be saying things like, I really shouldn't be rooting for this person, but I am. And if it was anything close to like the mail-in performances we got in Book of Boba Fett, we wouldn't care about any of it. Like, we wouldn't care about the characters, we wouldn't care about the story, because the actors and actresses in these roles are not doing such elevated work to get us to care about it. And so kudos to them. Great casting, great, and of course great writing and directing, but great performances can make up for a lot of shortfalls in whether it be a script or a direction. But when you have good scripts, good directing, and good actors, it's a very powerful product, which is what we got in season 1.
Definitely. Maturity and believability were bonuses. The moral quandaries of Cassian, Luthen, and Mon were intense and unforgiving. The moral relativism of Dedra and Cyril was simultaneously attractive and repulsive. Within 5 minutes, we knew Andor wasn't created for children. Too many Star Wars productions in the Disney era infantilized their audiences. You covered the superlative performances by Stellan Skarsgård, Genevieve O'Reilly, the Aldhani crew, Kyle Soller, etc. Nods to Diego Luna and Andy Serkis, who were just preternatural. I will entertain no disagreement with regard to their characters. Kino Loy, come on. Serkis delivered one of the best performances in Star Wars' long history. Sacrifice and tragedy distinguish Andor from all other stories in the Star Wars galaxy. Talk about the series' grittiness or darkness. Do you anticipate the same level of maturity in season 2?
Well, I think that it's going to be darker. Season 1 was very dark. You can't, and I believe, I've listened to some interviews with Tony Gilroy and others, but mostly Tony Gilroy when it comes to this topic. And we saw this a little bit in the original trilogy. We saw it mostly in Empire Strikes Back. The stakes of what a revolution or an insurgency is, or are, I should say. How does insurgency happen? How does it become legitimate? That's the story in Star Wars, and we're getting this in Andor, right? We're getting season 1. We've got, the Empire is established. There are people who are not happy about it. There are people working independently to fight it, to destroy it as the ultimate goal, and replace it with some form of democracy. But these things are not fun, and they're not simple, and they're not jokey, and it's not stuff musicals are made out of. Okay, the seriousness of season 1, the adult themes. We had torture. We've had espionage, we've had murder, we've had betrayal, backstabbing, we've had people exploring motivations for involvement. The whole raid on Aldhani, we talk about 2 guys were in it for the money. 1 guy was in it for just the money that he needed to pay back his people and get off his, dirty homeworld or whatever. Another guy was there to steal all the money from the people who stole the money. You had other people there who were committed for various reasons against the Empire. One was again ideologically a philosopher for freedom and human rights, or rights in general. It's weird saying human rights in the Star Wars universe, but then you've got Mon Mothma's cousin, who's doing it for love, right? She's latched onto the rebellion because she's in love with a rebel, right? And so, like, her politics are weird. She's becoming more and more of a believer, I think, but I'm not sure if she's just saying the words because those are the words she thinks that her girlfriend wants to hear, or if those are the words she actually believes. But so you're exploring all these motives, and it's that whole enemy of my enemy is my friend, and politics make strange bedfellows, and all that kind of stuff, because you're seeing all these disparate parts come together. And again, this is 300 level political science kind of stuff. These people, insurgency, raising money, buying arms, smuggling. There's a lot of parallels to a lot of real world historical insurgencies and current and former revolutions and things. And there's a strong, there's a strong IRA vibe going on there. The robbing the banks to buy the guns to fight the war against the oppressor kind of a thing, right? Like that's a common thread through a lot of that. Those adult themes. I think it's going to get more adult in season 2 because we're more mature, whatever you want to look at. So when you say adult themes, people think about a Twi'lek party, and that's different. But these more mature themes of violence and political violence and what is acceptable or not acceptable when it comes to political violence. We're going to get more of the moral quandaries of Luthen and the do we let the people die so that we can maintain our cover, or do we participate in a little bit of our own fascism to move the ball farther down the field towards revolution? In season 1, we had the whole conversation about we want the Empire to overreact. We want the Empire to do something really bad, because if they do, then people will wake up, right? Because it's the whole frog in boiling water scenario. They've been so gradual about everything that people just haven't noticed the Empire. And then, like some of the conversations that Mon Mothma has where there are people like, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what are you worried about? Kind of a deal. And it's that sort of low grade, slow motion tyranny, where you don't go from 0 to 1,000, it's one step at a time over a period of time. And then pretty soon it's too late. And so Luthen's like, well, we got to do something crazy. And a lot of the innocent people are going to get hurt. But ultimately the net positive is worth it. And these kinds of political conversations, when it comes to that type of stuff, again, they're going to get more intense in season 2, because I think with the potential of the Gorman massacre, if that's what they're showing us, or something similar to the Gorman massacre, you're going to see a group of insurgents who are either encouraging a group of people to rise up against the Empire so that they will be brutally massacred, so then that they can be used as a propaganda tool for fundraising and for unification of factions and like all this stuff. This is like spy thriller, CIA, KGB doing the dance and the Cold War kind of stuff, and using proxy fights and really interesting, intense, emotionally charged stuff, deep, analysis and deep conversations and themes. But there's going to be a lot more of that. I mean, we already saw torture in season 1. There's probably going to be more of that in season 2. We're going to see civilians who are protesting getting shot in the streets. We're probably going to see more revenge killing on the part of the rebels against various Imperials. That's a strong motivation for a lot of the characters that are going to be carrying over from season 1. So I think it will get darker. I think that we're going to see a more overreaction on the part of the Empire. We're going to see Dedra and her colleagues really drop the facade of polite government oversight and policing into gulags and torture, and we're going to see the full evil of the Empire, and not the cartoony cackling emperor kind of evil, but like the real everyday terror of a fascist regime. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be great. It's going to provide great conflict and great resolution as part of the show. And then of course, we all know kind of where it ends, but the story arcs of like what I have questions about Luthen, like where he's going to be at the end of the show. I think there's bad things are going to happen to a lot of people we really like in this show. And that's going to be handed to you in a certain way where you're going to have to confront it. You're going to have to deal with characters you like dying or being killed off in various ways to move the story believably towards the conclusion, which is Cassian Andor riddled with guilt and self-loathing, trying to overcome, his personal darkness and realize that he's in a fight for good and to start acting like it. And so how we get there is probably going to require a lot of darkness. And so, yeah, season 2 is going to be equally, if not more, but probably more dark or adult or mature or whatever you want to call it than season 1. Maybe you get that better ending on Ferrix that you were looking for. Spend a little more time on Ferrix and seeing what's happening to the people in Cassian's absence or whatever. I don't know. Or maybe for all those fans of the prequels, we get some more Imperial politics. I don't know. Like more scenes in the Senate. Bring in the Emperor.
To that end, I would welcome events like the Spellhouse Power Station raid on screen. Increase our emotional investment with gut-wrenching chapters. Show, don't tell in that example. Introduce us to characters like Anto Krieger so we can experience sadness and anger and steel our hearts for the struggles to come. Rogue One, A New Hope, etc.
Getting Krieger in there would have been awesome, especially like if you could squeeze in a few more meetings between the rebel factions. So like you've got Luthen and Saw and Krieger together. Forrest Whitaker sold the emotional impact of Krieger. You felt it, you understood it, right? You understood the significance of it, what it meant to him, what it meant to the rebellion, the level of stakes we're playing with here, where we're sacrificing people to maintain our illusion that we don't know what's going on or whatever, or that we don't have a spy inside. Like, he sold it and it was great. But if you had met Krieger, right, and if you'd maybe shown how like he and Saw were really tight, maybe they didn't necessarily trust Luthen, right, the two of them or whatever, like, and you built that character into the story, again, it makes his death even more impactful and it makes Saw Gerrera's response even more understandable.
Let's discuss Andor's Season 1 story arcs, or chapters. Episodes 1 through 3 comprise the first chapter. They chronicle Cassian's uprooting at an early age, search for his long-lost sister, trouble with Primor's security, and meeting with Luthen Rael. A crash landing during the Clone Wars shaped his destiny. Decades later, his adoptive home, Ferrix, became a target thanks to his questionable behavior. As an outlaw, he was recruited by the rebellion against the Empire. But he remained an opportunist, not a rebel, until the end of Season 1. What did you enjoy about the first chapter of Andor?
The things about the first several episodes that I really like, all the Ferrix stuff. And again, this goes all the way through the first season. I love all the Ferrix stuff. The characters and their relationships and the fleshing out of that world. The Corpo stuff I think is great. All the pleasure zone or whatever they call it, leisure zone, and all that kind of stuff. And the syndicalism aspect of fascism is on play here again with the Empire outsourcing security to the places where they don't want to waste their good assets. They just like let the corporations run the show until they can't trust them to run the show, which we see later in Season 1. The corporate cops acting tough and being jerks, and how this sets off this whole journey, really, when you think about it. So we start off with, the history of Cassian being a native of another planet that was, destroyed by the Empire ecologically, and then being caught up in a scenario where he gets removed from his family unit, I guess. While it was a welcome and bold decision to show all of his flashbacks, his childhood flashbacks, without any kind of subtitles or anything, or any kind of translation, right? That was cool that they did that, but at the same time, we probably needed just a little bit more to understand why there's no adults on that planet. But that's like a minor nitpick. But we get his background, right? That he's a fish out of water, right? He's been brought to this. He's raised in one culture, grew up in one culture. He's taken away suddenly and abruptly by people, and adopted. We see that he's already got some anger problems. as a young person, and then we flash forward and we see him. He's still not fully settled in his world, right? And so he's driven by the fact that he knows that somewhere out there potentially he still has relatives that clearly in a working class community, right? He basically lives in like Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and everybody works at the steel mill, but he's the guy that's too cool for school and wants to start a rock band or whatever, right? He doesn't do the 9 to 5 thing, right? He doesn't go into the coal mines, right? He doesn't do the stuff that everybody else does. He's not fully integrated into that community, and he's still driven by whatever guilt he has for abandoning his sister on that planet, even though he personally didn't make a choice to abandon his sister, but it's something that clearly haunts him. And so we get his early motivations, we get his early setup, and so it's great. But the whole situation with these rent-a-cops causing problems is why we have the entire show. It's why we have Cassian Andor, the rebel, in Rogue One, right? It's why we have this whole series of events that leads to the expansion, at the very minimum, the expansion of the rebellion, right? The involvement, of Luthen on Ferrix and all this stuff. It all comes from the fact that Cassian went off and made a bad decision. And yeah, it's whether it's manslaughter or murder or self-defense or whatever. It's because of it's this whole series. I think it's laid out in this intro. It's the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Cassian is off planet because he's trying to find his sister, right? That's important to him, right? And he's got some information that leads him to Morlana. She's working at this brothel. I'm going to go find her. He shows up in the brothel. All the rent-a-cops are there, on duty, drinking, chasing girls, or whatever they're chasing. And he gets embroiled in this thing, and he winds up overreacting. I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but he uses a level of force in response to being harassed that results in death. And then we get to see who Cassian is in this moment, where he makes a value judgment. And I use value, in air quotes, because he's doing the math in his head. I'm not supposed to be here. Right? Nobody's supposed to know about me. I just killed, whether it be accidentally or on purpose, I just killed one person. If I leave a witness, I know I'm going down. These guys are cops. They're not going to let this go. So he decides to kill the second guy in cold blood. First guy may have been self-defense, may have been an accident, but the second guy was straight up murder, and he made a decision. And we see this through line now into Rogue One. Right? We see him, same thing. I'm stuck on a planet. There's Imperial presence. I've got information that's vital to the rebellion. I've got to get out of here. Homeboy's got a bad leg and a broken arm or whatever. He can't climb, so I'm just going to kill him. Right? He served his part. He got me the information. I got the information. The rebellion. It's ends justify the means mentality. It's all very transactional. It's cold-hearted. The greater good is used to cloak the more disturbing decision. Well, I did it for the greater good. Did it for the rebellion. And even Cassian says this in Rogue One later on. He's done terrible things for the rebellion, right? And he wants to, if not be forgiven for his sins, he wants to at least justify it in such a way that it all makes sense. And so that's all planted in the first 3 episodes. But I love the Cyril's introduction, his overzealous enthusiasm for duty, and serving, and like all and law and order and all. It's just is fantastic. The fact that his boss says, "Look, man, don't do anything stupid while I'm away." It's like the parents, like, we're going on a trip. Don't take the car out. Don't have a party in the house. And he's just like straight up is on the phone as soon as the door closes. We're going to get a bunch of troops. We're going to go find this guy. We're scouring the universe for any clues. We're going to have justice, and we're going to do it all before Dad gets home. And so it really sets up your main characters really, really well. Did we necessarily need the flashbacks or as much of the flashbacks as we got. Man, maybe not, but it did a great job. I like the fact also that these first 3 episodes that set up the rest of the show and set up all these connections to Rogue One take the time. They don't feel rushed, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, it's boring, it's slow. No, it was actually taking the time to let the characters breathe, let you understand, where they're from, what their thought processes are, what the ramifications of their actions are going to be, and understanding the more complex universe that we live in when it comes to how do these characters relate to one another, how do they know each other. You got the ex-girlfriend, the new boyfriend, the best friend who is willing to, despite knowing it's not going to turn out well, sticking up for his buddy and working on alibis for him and all that stuff. And then the adoptive mother that, despite the fact that her adopted child is making terrible decisions, living a horrible life, like the unconditional love there and all that. It's like it's all established, right? And these are all things that we keep hitting back on throughout the rest of the season. Cassian keeps trying to come back and rescue his mom and do the right thing, and he keeps coming back to pay off his debts and all that stuff. And then the way the community works and the way the Empire is trying to take advantage of at the end with the funeral, trying to take advantage of their cultural traditions and norms in such a way to lay a trap for this guy. Like the whole thing is really set up in those first few episodes. And so I think it was very well done and very well handled.
Absolutely. I want to highlight a few scenes. I mentioned one in a previous video. The conversation between Chief Hine and Deputy Inspector Karn. Excellent. Hine knew from experience his men weren't innocent, but subtlety was lost on his subordinate.
You look stricken, Deputy Inspector. Are you absorbing my meaning here? Trying, sir.
Next, Karn's attempt at a motivational speech to the Primor security team. He lacked credibility and charisma. He spoke of abstract concepts like justice to a rank-and-file team that just wanted to kick ass.
There's no room for doubt on the path to success.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny that whole scene is again, it's drawn from so many. A lot of this stuff is drawn from so many real life examples, and it's funny because people say, we don't want current day stuff in Star Wars, and it's true, we don't want current day like politics and stuff, but these are experiences that everybody has had at some point. And this one is really common in the military. A platoon of guys, who've all worked together for years, lived together for years, right? They have this tight camaraderie. They know what their mission is. They know how lethal they are. And they've got a sergeant who's kind of got to, he's got to walk both lines. He's got to be a company man, but he's also, he's one of the guys too. He's been there. He's worked his way up through all that. He's been a part of it. And then you got the fresh lieutenant right out of, ROTC at some junior college somewhere, who's never led anything in their life except maybe a group discussion in a classroom, right? And they've managed to go through the program and get the air quotes leadership degree or whatever it is, and they get their gold bar, and they go out there and they're like, all right guys, this is what we're gonna do, and everybody just kind of rolls their eyes.
Well said, sir. Inspiring.
And it's that moment right there where you got the guy talking about the abstract concepts, justice, and we've got our colleagues have been killed, and like let's do this for the company, and all of a sudden, and he's like you say, the other guy's like, do I get to use my nightstick, right? Do I get to do a little police brutality this weekend, because that would be great, And that, like you say, that's all they want, and that's all they're down for. It's like, yeah, we're going to have a reinforced, team. We're going to bring way more guys in than we think we need. We're going to give them carte blanche to, crack skulls and, kick butt or whatever. And here comes the guy from the central office. It's like Lieutenant Gorman in Aliens. How many combat drops you been on? Oh, none. How many drops is this? Oh, I've been on like 100 and whatever. Like, they're all simulated. It's like, same guy. It's the same dude. Totally unequipped for what's actually going to happen. Doesn't understand facts on the ground. Doesn't understand tactics. Doesn't understand anything. But everybody in that scene is also driven by their ambition. The sergeant guy wants to prove that he's not just the line thug, right? He wants to show, oh, I'm a leader too, and I've got this under control, and I know what's happening, and I believe in the values of my leadership team, which is justice and And so he's an ass kiss. Cyril's an ass kiss. Everybody's like trying to, get ahead or whatever. And probably the only people who are really paying attention to the stuff on the ground is the team, and they have the least control over any of it. And yeah, so it's a very real thing. Everybody's had that new boss or the new guy on the team, and you can just see it in the faces of those cops when he's talking, and it's like, I'm surprised it didn't work in somebody looking at a watch, it's just that kind of stuff. It was great.
Yeah, a good scene. Diego Luna. He's very good at conveying nervous energy. Cassian's negotiation with Bix to sell his NS9 Starpath unit. Bix didn't share his urgency, but she was willing to help him. Clearly, the two shared a complicated history.
How soon could it be here?
Just planning to reach out at the end of the month.
No, this would have to be now.
For what? For one item?
But my favorite scene from the first 3 episodes was Cassian's initial meeting with Luthen. Cassian wanted a quick transaction. Luthen tried to introduce the bigger picture, the rebellion. He'd done his homework on Cassian, and he intuitively understood the fork in the road. Cassian could become a criminal and accomplish nothing, or he could become a revolutionary and save the galaxy.
The way they laugh, the way they push through a crowd. The sound of that voice telling you to stop, to go, to move. Telling you to die.
Diego Luna and Stellan Skarsgård were superb.
Yeah, I also, the one other scene that works really well and that I love too was when Cassian goes to his buddy, like finds him when he's getting off work, and he's like all beaten up, from fighting with the cops or whatever, and he's like, I went over to your house last night. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, and you had a bottle and we did this stuff. And then he's like, and then he like turns it around and he's like, then you insulted my hospitality, yeah. So I had to push you down or whatever. Like, I was like,
You failed to gauge the depth of my irritation. You rose to make your point more vocally. I was helping you back into your chair when you fell.
Not to give it too much away or to put myself on a watch list, but I've had those conversations with my closest friends, like in high school and in college and stuff, where it's like, I really need your help right now. And we're going to come up with a little story, right? And the fact that like he doesn't really want to do it, but he also understands that Cassian probably doesn't ask for these things that often, and when he does, it's really important. And so then they start to craft that narrative together, and it's a great scene. It's like you can tell these two characters really know each other and know them really well, and that they are in a weird way best of friends, not guys that you would think would be best of friends. You got the guy who's the steady 9-to-5 worker guy, takes his responsibilities seriously, goes, never late for work, always works hard, takes care of people. And then you got the other guy who's the shady, shifty dude, but they're tight and you can totally tell. And that was another great one. And again, two good actors, really great dialogue. Just again, it sets up, more of the action later, more of the interactions later, all that stuff. Yeah, it another great scene in those first few episodes.
There was a theme with Cassian. He resented authority. But time and again, authoritarians dictated the course of his life. His home planet was exploited for a distant war. His adoptive father was hung by a regime that tolerated no dissent. He was sent to Mimban, the galaxy's equivalent of Verdun 1916. So when 2 corporate security guards attempted a shakedown, Cassian's response was predictable. They embodied the oppression that continually thwarted his attempts at a better future. He became a small-time hustler based on the establishment's harsh treatment of him and his loved ones. He learned to trust no one and leave no witnesses. But Season 1 showed the realization that, try as he might, he couldn't free himself from the system. As his circumstances worsened, he was left with only two options: flight or fight. The former was, at best, a short-term solution, and the establishment had proven it could find him even when it wasn't looking for him. So, ultimately, he chose the latter, and individualism gave way to collectivism.
The beginning of the turn, at least in like you say, the individualist to the more of a collectivist view of freedom, right? That my freedom is important, but what value is my freedom if others don't have freedom as well? And you see that change. I think he's still working on his authority problem, though. This is the thing. These are great questions and great conversations to have, which just show again the level and the depth and of the writing of the characters. I don't know if he's an altruist yet. Even at the end of season 1, he has an opportunity to tell his mother, because his mom kind of goes a little crazy at the end, right? She's like, I'm a rebel now. She's caught the fever, of insurrection. And she winds up like breaking her hip, crawling under the sewers of the building to try and, get in and kill stormtroopers or whatever. He has an opportunity because she's like, what they did, on Aldhani 5 and, and he had an opportunity to tell her that was me. I did that. He tries to say, oh, it was just thieves. It was just thieves. She's having her moment. She's believing in the miracle when he's trying to tell her it was a card trick. And he had the opportunity to say, I was there. I was part of that. I did that. He doesn't do it. And Cassian is always running. From the moment that he gets taken off of his home planet, he's running from something, right? He's running from authority. He's running from responsibility. And even at the end of season 1, he goes back to try and get his mom. His mom's dead. He's starting to buy into the rebellion thing, but it's like hooking up with the rebellion at the end and asking Luthen to train him or to take him in. It's one more run, right? He's running away. He can't go back to Ferrix ever again. He's evacuated the friends or the core people that he cares about on the planet because he couldn't save his mother, so he offloads, Bix and others. But then he's like, I'm a wanted criminal. The Empire knows who I am. I have nowhere to go except if I join this underground rebellion, which is a group of criminals who will help hide my identity and help keep me, air quotes, safe. And he's still running a side hustle the whole time. Vel, her character is similar to Cassian when it comes to whether or not they're a true believer, right? Everybody's trying to get Cassian to be a true believer. The kid with the manifesto, Luthen, others trying to get him to buy into this thing. He's like you say, incrementally, he's making changes in his personal philosophy that will ultimately lead to a buy-in. But I don't think the buy-in happens until Rogue One. When he gives the speech to Jyn about me and the boys here have done some really reprehensible crap, and we got blood on our hands and we got guilty consciences. We want to make it right and we want to do the right thing. They volunteer for a suicide mission. They know they're all going to die. That is like probably his first truly selfless act in his entire character arc since he was forcibly adopted. So I think that he like Vel is, as we move through and probably, through season 2, you're seeing this character who, yes, he hates authority, and yes, he has some feelings about the Empire because of the way they treated his adopted dad and his mom, or adopted mom. But he's really just a guy that doesn't like rules, period. He's like an anarcho-libertarian, right? He wants zero rules, zero restraints, and wants to be able to do whatever he wants. And by being a part of the rebellion, it allows him to act outside of the law and outside of rules and outside of control. And so, sure, it's a vehicle to help him achieve his own personal goals. And Vel is kind of in the same light. So again, we were talking about this before we started recording. There's plenty of modern day, 21st century, 2024 politics in Andor, but it doesn't feel like it because it's done in such a way and written in such a way that it feels natural and organic to the universe of Star Wars, unlike some of the other shows. I'm looking at you, Acolyte. But the whole thing about Vel is she lives on a planet. It's like this deeply religious, conservative, rigid society that believes in all of the traditional things that you associate with the traditional things, right? Like, marriage is between a man and a woman, and it is arranged by the parents, and it's for this and that, and here she is. She's a lesbian, and she's stuck in this community, and she kind of has these feelings like, your typical college kid that comes from an upper middle class or rich family. They want to dabble in, some subversive politics a little bit. And so now here she is, alienated in this community, alienated from her culture and her planet. And then she meets this woman and falls in love. And this woman is part of this illicit rebellion against the legitimate government, right? It's an armed insurrection against the legitimate government. And she's all into it because her girlfriend's all into it, right? This happened, and again, doesn't have to necessarily be because they're girlfriends. I mean, this happens in a lot of relationships. You find somebody you're into, and then suddenly their interests become your interests because you want to be with them and get to know them and, be a part of their life and whatever. And so she gets sucked into this revolution. But I don't know if she's a true believer in the revolution, at least not at the beginning. She doesn't follow the rules of, spycraft, and she's constantly reaching out to people and sending messages when she shouldn't, and she's violating radio silence, and she's, demanding to see the leader of the movement. It's like, no, that's not how this works. The cells are kept separate, and like, I'll carry a message. What do you want to know kind of stuff. And it's all because she's mad about her girlfriend. Later on in the episodes, when she's talking to Mon Mothma, she starts to use some of the words of, Luthen and her girlfriend and other true believers in the movement. But it feels like she's trying them on. It feels like she's getting used to the lingo. It's like when you're at work and you're learning the lingo, like the company speak, right? They've got a word for this. They don't call them employees. They call them partners or teammates, or like you're trying to get that lingo down, and she's starting to try it on, and she's starting to get into it and starting to buy into it, but she's there for completely different reasons too. And I think Cassian's character is also, we're seeing this evolution of all these people, right? Mon Mothma doesn't want to full commit either. She's happy to be behind the scenes, throwing money at this and arranging a meeting here and some stuff there, and trying to get legislation passed and do her work from inside the house, kind of a thing. But when Luthen pushes her and says, look, we have come to an inflection point, and we have to make some very hard decisions, and we have to do some very, ugly things in order to achieve the next step in this process. And she balks. She's like, no way. Like, that's not what we agreed to. That's not what I'm into this for. And it feels like all along the way, Luthen is constantly reminding everybody, the guy who's the insider on the ISB council, he comes down the elevator and he's like, oh man, I got a kid now. I can't do this. This is too risky. And he's like, bro, you're beyond that point. You're beyond the risk. You're a dead man. And it's just whether or not you can keep it together long enough to survive this whole thing or not. Like, you are an ISB officer who has great responsibility within that, Imperial intelligence organization. The minute they find out you're a traitor, you are toast. There's no like, oh, I'll have a little, leniency, or maybe they'll put me on probation or unpaid, leave or whatever. No, you're dead. You're dead. Right? You're already dead. And Luthen has to remind these people all throughout the show, right? Like, yes, what you're doing is helpful, and yes, what you're doing is important, but you don't realize how committed you actually are right now. And if you don't start acting, like how committed you actually are, you're either gonna screw up and get caught, you're not gonna survive the process, or you're gonna get turned into a counter double agent who's gonna sell me out. Like he's the only one who's like fully grounded in reality, and he's the believer, in this group of main characters. I mean, Saw Gerrera is a believer on another level, and we're gonna find out. I think back to your original question about whether or not season 2 is going to be darker or not. I think we're going to see when in Rebels, when Mon Mothma says we don't like Saw Gerrera because he's too extreme, or he's way out there, right? I think we're going to find out why she says that in season 2. We're going to see Saw Gerrera do some really reprehensible stuff. But again, these characters, we're wanting to root for them. We're wanting them to be good, but I think a lot of them are caught up in their own selfish interests and beliefs, and it's whether or not they're going to be fully able to eschew the selfishness by the end of season 2. And in my opinion, we don't really see that 100% turn in Cassian until Rogue One, when he agrees to go on that mission to Scarif.
Episodes 4 through 6 constituted the second chapter of Season 1, the Aldhani heist. Cassian joined a small rebel cell for a daring theft of Imperial credits. The team included converts, cynics, and criminals, but Cassian couldn't distinguish friend from foe until the bitter end. He grew to hate the mission, and in truth, Luthen had deceived him to test his resourcefulness. Interesting characters, building tension, unexpected twists. I really enjoyed this arc. What did you take from it?
Well, the big takeaways for me for this part, first of all, like we had talked about before, you have all of these disparate people coming together because they're united on some level by a distaste for the Empire, except for the one guy who's clearly trying to game the whole system and steal everything from everybody. But you have Karl Marx there writing his manifesto. You've got the one lady whose family was, butchered by stormtroopers. You've got Val or whatever. She's there for the girlfriend. You've got the lieutenant guy who went native and fell in love with a local girl, and she got killed by the Empire, and then he became disaffected. And then you've got the administrator guy who all his aspiration is to get off the rock. Right? He doesn't want to be there. He thinks he's above his position. He shouldn't be administrating this facility. But the thing, it felt very, it had a lot of Roman Empire kind of feeling to it. You've got the Legion out on the border defending the Empire, which is so far away. The only thing they really have out there on the frontier is there's the locals, and then there's their clinging to discipline and military order to remain imperial and not to start to assimilate into the native population, which happened to a lot of the Roman legions on the frontier, especially towards the end of the Empire. So I got a vibe of that going on, that tension between the locals and the colonial power trying to work together but not really respecting one another. The specter of integration with the local population and what it means to the leadership, at the facility, like the fact that this was forbidden, and that was interesting. The day-to-day operations of the facility, again, the guys that are playing cards and complaining about their rotations and their work shifts, and it turns, again, when you have cartoony, very simple villains, the mustache twirling bad guy is bad for being bad sake. They're easy to root against. They're easy to say, oh yeah, that's clearly the bad guy, we don't like him. But when you start showing the Empire as similar to the Ferrex folks. They're hardworking for the most part. They're dedicated to their jobs. The radio guy in this whole arc, right? He's just a dude doing his job. He's the one who kind of stays on point during this whole the eye scenario where everybody wants to go out and look at it. Everybody wants to take the day off from work to go hang out and experience this thing. And he's working his post and doing his job and is the one who kind of uncovers and almost foils the heist. Showing the leader of an Imperial garrison as a man with a family, right? We've never seen that before, right? And now we have two different Imperial characters in this show who are talking about their family and their home life. I mean, Rogue One, yeah, we got that with Galen Erso too, but we're not seeing, like, we don't see a lot of Imperials with like these concerns about why is my kid always sick and why can't we do this, and then the wife giving the officer crap about why are we stuck on this crappy planet, and like all these things. Like, these are, again, day-to-day stuff. Parents, husbands and wives, whatever, couples, families, whatever, they all have to deal with. Why does my job suck? Why do we have to relocate for work? Why, is this happening? Why is that? Why don't the kids respect me? Like these things are it's just real life. And it's really, really hard. I mean, yes, that conversation they have about the comfort stations and how they're totally subverting the culture of these people, and how they used to have 50,000 people show up for the event, and now it's like 500 if you're lucky, right? Yeah, there's some evil, again, colonial attitude there, where it's we're going to stamp out the local culture. We're either going to we're going to educate it out, or we're going to make them victims of their own vices. I mean, it feels very westward expansionist, the exchanging of pelts and all that. But it also makes it very, very hard to just 100% come down on these people, is that they're all evil. They're everyday people with everyday problems who happen to be on the wrong side of a conflict. And again, it forces the audience to really confront that and think about that stuff. So again, it's great. The things that stand out again from this section is the complexity of the characters is on display, and there's some great dialogue and some great interplay between the local population and the Imperials and the heist team and all that stuff. Like, but it just, again, it's more of this the writing and the dialogue and the characters and this real complex and nuanced portrayal of people. This story, the whole season 1 of Andor, this whole story is a very human type story. Like, it deals with people and their beliefs and their culture and their issues and their religions and their politics and their morality and ethics. And it's not a simple version of that. It's not A New Hope, where Luke is good and Leia is good and the rebellion is good and Han is slightly sketchy, but he makes the turn and he's good. And then all the stormtroopers are faceless evil monsters, and Darth Vader is the darkness and he's good. He is evil and must be destroyed. That was really easy. We don't know what's going on at home for Governor Tarkin, right? We don't know, did his kids turn out okay? Did they graduate from college, right? Does he have grandkids? How's his mortgage? Like, we don't get that in episode 4, but we're getting that kind of stuff in Andor, right? Where suddenly now it makes it very hard for you. One of the things that is common since the beginning of humanity and organized warfare is that it's common for you to dehumanize your enemy and to use, whether it be political or racial or cultural stereotypes, to describe them so you can make them more killable or easy to kill, right? They're the whatevers, right? They're less than us. They're less human than us. They're like these things that we got in propaganda during the first 2 world wars. you do that because you're dealing with the psychology of war, right? You're dealing with humans killing other humans, which is not a natural act, and you're trying to put something in their psyche that allows them to compartmentalize that killing, right? And we do that with the Empire kind of in a way in the trilogy of films, because the level of the level of complexity for characters really just revolves around Vader. He was once a good guy who became bad, still has good in him, we're going to redeem him. That's the most complex character arc in really the entire original trilogy. And we don't like any of the other Imperials. We only like Vader because now we learned that he's Luke's dad, and so now we got to deal with that, and we hope that he becomes a good guy, and he does, and yay, right? And that's the end of the trilogy. In the Andor series, and in Rogue One too, by extension, we're not really sure about who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong, and we're dealing more with just the humanity of the characters. And yes, this includes also the alien characters too. But this humanity, this level of complexity, and this thing where it's like, it's easy for you to see where good people can go wrong, or bad people can go good, right? And then having to deal with all of that fallout of all of that. And so again, this another section, but the entire show is this, but this is another section where when they're in camp getting ready, when we're watching the day-to-day workings of the garrison, and then of course the stuff on Coruscant with Mon Mothma sprinkled out throughout all these arcs, right? We're seeing all of this stuff. And so I think it makes it way more believable. Yes, it's science fiction. Yes, it's a galaxy far, far away. Yes, there's somewhere out there's a Jedi. But the point is that this is way more real. The way these characters are developed and written, and the struggles that they all face, and the things and the choices they make, and the actions they take. And again, this whole section really kind of focuses on that, because it's an extended heist scene, right? We're going to steal some stuff. Okay, that's not in and of itself is not. I mean, it's exciting, but it's not very edifying or illuminating about what's actually going on. People steal stuff all the time, but understanding all the people involved in it on both sides of the theft, the people that are stealing and the people that are being stolen from, is really what stands out.
Agreed. Star Wars rarely features the practical, realistic style of this arc. The premise, stealing credits to finance the rebellion, warrants a separate video. X-Wings didn't pay for themselves, I guess. But unlike The Last Jedi's ham-handed moral relativism with DJ as spokesperson, Andor managed to avoid ignorance and sanctimony. I view Nemec as Thomas Jefferson, not Karl Marx, despite his use of the word manifesto. He articulated the rebellion's ideology based on Enlightenment philosophy, like Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. I noticed hints and signs of his manifesto throughout Season 1, as if it had ambition but didn't survive the editing process. Perhaps it will influence Season 2. Talk about Nemec's work and any real-world parallels that you see.
He's writing a manifesto. Did he tell you?
I don't know. I don't think Nemec is necessarily Marxist in the purest sense of the word. And what we did get from his manifesto was not economic in nature. It was, like you said, it was more discussing rights and freedoms and live free of tyranny and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I felt a lot more, American Revolution versus Russian Revolution when it came to the language of his manifesto. But I think that there's a couple of things that you can take away from, not necessarily Marx himself, or even, more of a Leninist kind of, I guess, influence. And then simply what it is the Leninist approach to what is referred to as the useful idiot, in the sense that you find people that you don't necessarily agree with or even like, but you have enough common ground with them that they will support you in your revolution, so that you can build broader and larger coalitions to achieve the goals of the revolution. And then once you achieve those goals, then you can internally purge the people that are not true believers, right? So, the term, again, you can look this up, it's the useful idiot, but it's people who are willing to support you in your cause because they don't recognize the true success of your cause as the end of their existence. And while I will say it's not that dark in Andor yet. Again, we might see something in season 2, but the fact that you have so many people with so many different belief systems, and ultimately the fact that we have to create something called the Rebel Alliance, which in the first several movies sounded like a cool name, but now we're actually really understanding what that means. And what it really means is it's not an alliance of, or it's not an alliance of rebels, it's rebels who have allied to fight the Empire, right? And so what we're seeing, and this has been a subplot in the cartoon, in the Rebels cartoon, where and also sort of the seeds were laid for this in the Clone Wars with the Separatists and others, but and it's been very much core to Saw Gerrera's arc, and it's especially on display in Andor. Everybody has their own goals, and everybody has their own idea of what an empire-free universe looks like. And I think what the guy was trying to lay out in his video was that the Republic, as portrayed in the prequels and in the Clone Wars show, was not necessarily this wonderful, altruistic, beautiful democracy that everybody gives the lip service, right? I love democracy, Anakin. Well, okay. Do you really? What was the Republic beforehand? And so, what are we rebelling against? Well, some of us are rebelling against the Empire, like the Empire trademark, the COG and the Stormtroopers and whatever. And some of us are rebelling against authoritarianism, which is not just the Empire, right? It could be other governments in the galaxy. It could be the Hutts in the Outer Rim, right? Whatever. Some of us are just rebelling against any kind of rules, right? So you have the anarchist element, like the pure anarchists, the no government, no rules, the libertarians with guns or whatever, right? They're over the horizon. They don't want any kind of association. They don't want any kind of restriction. Personal freedom is so important that other personal freedoms are die in its wake or whatever. Like it's out of control, right? So you have all these different political philosophies, right? You have the philosophy of freedom, and you have the philosophies of justice and equality, and you have all these things, and each group they do a little bit of the buffet, right? I'm a little more on the individual rights over the collective rights. Well, I'm a little more on the collective rights over the individual. Well, I want more justice and less this, and I want less justice and more of that, or whatever, right? And so you have all these little splinter groups, but they are currently all very mad at the Empire, but they're not organized. And so the Rebel Alliance is all those little groups coming together to form a larger group and fight the Empire. Now, the historical example of that, I think a lot of people get really upset about the sequel trilogy and saying like, well, we overthrew the Empire and the good guys won, and why is the government of the New Republic, and why is all this stuff so weird, and why is there factions, and why? So again, if you look back in history, and if you look at revolutions, you'll see that once a revolution is fully realized and the goals of that revolution are achieved, the people in power have one of two choices. The people who have won the revolution have one of two choices. They can either enter into a perpetual state of revolution, or they can become the thing they revolted against or cited revolution against in order to maintain the power they've just achieved. And so you see a lot of revolutionary governments who come in with all these flowery and altruistic speeches about human rights and dignity and liberty and freedom and, egalitarianism and equality, turns into things like Robespierre's terror and the Leninist Stalinist purges and the Irish Civil War, the Whiskey Rebellion being put down by George Washington, which is something they don't teach you in school. If you want to read about that, that's kind of hilarious. We had this entire revolution to overthrow the tyranny of kings, and through taxation and all these, evil government overreaches in business and commerce and society. And then that revolution's over, Britain pulls out of North America, and the newly established colonial government needs money, so they start taxing whiskey. And a bunch of people said, hey, we just fought a war over this crap. Why are you doing that? And so they rose up. A lot of the people who rose up against the colonial government were the people who fought for the colonial government just weeks prior. And then George Washington sends in a battalion of troops and just crushes these people and says, nope, sorry, we're the government now. Right? And it's a very dark and weird thing to look at, especially so close to the revolution, because all of the sloganeering and all of the flowery writing and the great speeches and the declarations and all those things, as soon as those guys got what they wanted, which was control of their own continent and their own destiny, the minute somebody challenged them internally, they destroyed them. Okay, and so I bring this up because we look at what's going on with the government of the universe in Star Wars after the original trilogy and into the sequel trilogy, and a lot of people complain about it. It's one of the few things actually in the sequel trilogy that's understandable from a historical standpoint. The rest of it's all garbage, right? The way they treated Luke Skywalker and all that stuff, like all that stuff is garbage. But having an unstable liberal democracy in the wake of an armed insurrection against an authoritarian power generally winds up in some form of chaos, unless that egalitarian, air quotes, liberal democracy turns into its own authoritarian regime. Okay? So the coalition of people that are coming together in this show, the various rebel cells that are working together, even though they're not working in concert, right? So they're not being directed to work together, but they're all working towards the same goal, which is fighting the Empire. It's coming through in all of, again, organizationally, right? Luthen's group is one group, Saw Gerrera's group is another group, Mon Mothma's stuff is another, aspect of it. And then there's others. We heard about the guy that got sold out, who were going to attack the power station or whatever, and they let them die. That was another group. But even within Luthen's group, you have all of these other people, or all these people who have all these varying views on what it means to rebel, what the goal of the rebellion is. And so, your guy is a political philosopher, and he's trying to make sense of it all. And I think that what he's trying to do is to create sort of the handbook, right? Like, why is this rebellion happening? What are the core reasons for it? And then ultimately why you should support it. And I think that, it was, there may have been things that got chopped in season 1, but there's great moments too, because this kid is also, for lack of a better word, he's Cassian's conscience. And it's great the way they do it, because Cassian's like, I don't want to read your book. I don't want to hear your words, when he's talking to the kid, right? When he's still alive. It's like, I don't want that stuff. It's the blissful ignorance, right? If he doesn't know about the morality of the revolution, or if he doesn't know about the philosophy of the revolution, then he doesn't have to confront it and deal with it, right? Cassian's happy being sort of this not quite good, shady, sketchy, pseudo-anarchist kind of guy, right? I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm gonna make my own way. Rules don't apply to me. Screw you. I'm in it for mine. You know, you guys, like, that sounds too much like religion, and I don't like religion. You know, like, go away. Okay? And then throughout the show, there's these moments where he bumps into it. Like, he has his box with his stolen handgun, all of his ill-gotten credits, and the kid's manifesto, and he accidentally turns it on. And he's, you know, when he's first on the pleasure planet there and he's getting the money to go to the grocery store, he accidentally turns it on, and the guy starts talking about freedom and liberty, and he's like, and he, like, you know, turn it off, you know. He doesn't want to be reminded of this stuff. He doesn't want to know about this stuff. It's like a commentator who was speaking about religion, and he was saying that a lot of people avoid religion because once they sit down and engage with the religion and they learn about whatever that particular religion's morality is, right? Whatever their rules of the road are for whatever the ultimate goal of the religion is, salvation or whatever it might be. You can't ever unlearn that, or you can't ever walk away from that. Now, you know, at least in that particular philosophy, you know the right and wrong. You know what you should and should not be doing, and you can no longer live your life the way you lived it before you got to that point, because now you have this burden of knowledge. And I think Cassian is fighting that with the political philosophy behind the rebellion. In short term, he's making money. He's getting to say, you know, screw the rules, and I can carry a gun around, and I can do shady things, and I can act however I want. I can, you know, indulge my impulses for violence and for criminality. But once you start to get a moral thing behind it, then you have to take all those actions and say, okay, now they have to fit within this framework. And now I can't just be, it's more rules, right? It's more rules for him to live by, which he doesn't like. He doesn't like authority. He doesn't like rules. And when you give somebody a moral cause, now that's an authority you can't ignore, right? You can ignore the cops. You can ignore your parents. You can ignore your teachers, right? But when you move up to a different level, a more esoteric or spiritual or conceptual level, whatever word you want to use for it, it's harder to say, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to abide by that. And so Cassian's like running away from this, and this guy is his conscience, and eventually it catches up to him, because we see at the end of the show, he's listening to it the night before the funeral, and he's actually fully engaging with the text and listening to this kid, you know, give him the moral pillars of the actions that they've been taking. It's not just robbing banks. It's not just waving guns around. It's not just punching stormtroopers. You know, it's something bigger and more important. And this is, again, the beginning of where we start to see Andor start to make his full change from a selfish actor to a selfless actor.
During the last episode of the Aldhani arc, Andor's production values impressed me, particularly the visual effects for the eye. The series was filmed in different countries. Practical sets were constructed. Expense has been cited as the main reason for the studio's decision to stop at 2 seasons. Tony Gilroy envisioned more. He was forced to condense and accelerate his plans. Without mass appeal, without a character like Grogu to fuel merchandise sales, Andor, regardless of our warm feelings about it, didn't lead to revenue. Could a loyal audience and critical acclaim ever justify its cost?
Well, that is an excellent question, because we don't really know what the actual viewership numbers are, and we don't know what the subscriptions look like. I mean, we hear general terms. We've seen, you know, various reports from financial channels and other things where it's like subscriptions are down, and the monies that are being spent by Lucasfilm versus, you know, return on investment. And this is across all of their projects, not just Andor. But I think it would be very difficult for us to make a determination about value per dollar spent. I can tell you that it didn't hurt Disney as much as Acolyte did. Because Acolyte was, 3 times the cost for 3/4 of the episodes with complete scorched earth devastation to the brand. That one is, you can directly correlate, negative impact dollar per dollar. But Andor is kind of weird because nobody quit over Andor, right? Nobody said, you can go out, you can look at the social media, you can look at all the YouTube channels. The worst thing they would come up with is, oh, it's boring. That was the best critique they could come up with. Nobody was like flipping the table over and unsubscribing and burning it down, and none of that was happening after Andor. Okay, so the feeling in the community of Star Wars fans was that while you might not have gotten a huge return on your investment, it didn't feel like it was a loss of money. It may have been. Again, we don't have any visibility into the actual books when it comes to what the show spent, what it spent it on, and then what the peripheral earnings were based on subscriptions, minutes viewed, and then merchandise sold, whatever. Okay. So the feeling I get is that it didn't do, if it did harm, it did very little harm. My thought is it was probably a net neutral, in the sense that the money that was spent and the critical acclaim that it got and the strong reception that it received from hardcore traditional Star Wars fans. I don't know, what would you call the people that have been with the franchise since the beginning? I don't know. They like to call us toxic man babies, but that's not the right nomenclature. But those people were immensely satisfied with the product, and I think that what they should view Andor as was Andor the Flex Seal on the crack in the dam of Star Wars, because people were running away from the franchise after the sequel trilogy, Book of Boba Fett, and third season Mando. I think that the fans were starting to run from the brand, and then they gave us Andor, and everybody's like, oh wait, they can still make good Star Wars. I think I might hang around a little longer, and then we got Acolyte. But it's like, I think that the money spent might, if you try and silo it and say specifically, was Andor a moneymaker? Maybe not, but we probably will never know. But what I can confidently say is that based on the atmosphere and the mood of the Star Wars community, it did a whole lot to keep people from abandoning the brand. And if Disney wants to be honest with themselves, and if they really want to assess what's going on with the brand of Star Wars, then they should honestly take a look at this and say, this is the stuff that saved us from going bankrupt. Like, they may go, Lucasfilm may be going bankrupt and might be gone in a couple of years, but Andor, it helped slow it slowed the car down. I don't know if it's still going to go off the cliff or not, but it definitely slowed the car down.
The third chapter of Season 1 was Narkina 5 by way of Ferrix and Neamos. Cassian paid his debts and tried to take his mother away from the scrapyards. She refused. He embraced hedonism on a resort planet, but the Empire responded to the Aldhani heist by increasing its supply of slave labor. Cassian was arrested and sentenced for nothing, so he went to prison, where death was the only release. Narkina 5 seems to be the most popular story arc. People discuss it more than other chapters, at least in my circles. Prison drama isn't a new concept, but the creators definitely tapped some universal fears. The electrified floors, competition, petty rewards, self-regulation, the presence or absence of surveillance. Psychology was a big part of this section. Your thoughts on Narkina 5?
Level 2, are you all scrambled or something? It takes a week for one word to get all the way up here, and you're all panicking about something that's happening on the other side of the building.
Well, it's interesting. It is generally everybody's favorite section or segment of the overall story, and it's the one that is the least Star Wars of the entire thing. It's all the prison psychology and all the things you mentioned, the gamification of incarceration, and it's funny. It's also one of the things where if you cut it out of the entire show, it's not entirely necessary in a way. Like, you can watch the show without going to prison, and the story flows, right? But it's so significant in a lot of ways. One, it gives you, once again, just more layers of evil for the Empire, the gulag, the work camp, all that stuff. As you mentioned, all the hideous ways you can die. In there we see a guy work himself to death. We see a guy get so mentally twisted by the oppression and the environment that he just offs himself. He steps on the electric floor, during their sleep cycle, and and then the whole character of Kino, like, Andy Serkis is a brilliant actor. Like, you can't argue that at all, right? And his performance in this show is epic. And if they gave out Oscars for limited streaming series on video services, he would have at least one for this show, right? It's just amazing. The way that he tells the story of his character's mental collapse and then rebirth through his facial expressions is amazing. And then this also is an interesting juxtaposition of the character of Cassian Andor, because this is the first time that we see Cassian Andor's rejection of authority and his ungovernable kind of countenance, right? The fact that he's completely against any kind of authority or rules, and he refuses to accept any kind of shackle or whatever, has to this point got him to prison, right? It's got him into all the problems in his life. It's got him sent to prison. And now that he's in prison, it's that personality, it's that characteristic or his personality trait that ultimately saves him and all of the other inmates. Now, the fact that everybody else just stepped in line, everybody else is playing the game and building the parts and fighting for that flavor in their goo. And he walks in, he's like, no, this is crap. Like, why are you guys, like, look around. Like, there's one of them, there's 50 of us. Why haven't we, when was the last time anybody tried to escape? And people are like, what are you talking about, dude? Nobody tries to escape here. Like, I'm out in, 50 days or what. Like, my sentence is almost up. I'm not going to do anything to screw this up. And then we see the breakdown of, turns out your sentence is not your sentence, right? Turns out it's a life sentence and not a whatever. And 2 years, 6 months, whatever it might be. And I also think that it's a nice and interesting kind of play on itself, is that Andor is so anti-establishment and anti-authority that he goes off and does all this stuff that causes all these problems, and then he goes out and he robs the garrison payroll department. And because of that robbery, Luthen gets what he wants. He gets his goal, right? He gets the Empire to overreact. And so we see the ISB step in, they have their emergency meeting, and they say things like, going forward, we're quadrupling all sentences, everything, like all the sentencing guidelines, all of these plans, all these retaliatory things, we're going to implement all of it. And so Andor, through various levels or various acts of defiance against the Empire, sets into motion the sentencing guideline that ultimately bites him. It's kind of funny. It's, again, that the road to hell, good intentions thing. It's like, oh, I'm gonna help the rebellion. We're gonna do a thing, and it's like, now look at you, and look at what you did to everybody else. And I think that Cassian never really acknowledges that. He's still angry about being put in jail for 6 years for something that he should have only been put in jail for 6 months for, which he probably should not have been put in jail at all for. But he never really comes around and says, if this happened to me, this happens to everybody else now who goes to the criminal justice system in the Empire. Like he never has that awareness. He gets into prison and oppositional defiant Cassian kicks in, and nobody's to use the line from the episode, nobody's listening, right? Nobody's listening to him because they don't believe him. But once they find out what's going on other floors and how the Empire handled the information leak by frying an entire floor of the prison, right? People start to listen and believe in what he's saying, and then they're like, okay, you're the, how are we going to get out of here? Let's work a plan. Let's figure it out. And so this also coincides with Kino Loy's character going from being the best inmate possible, right? He's worked his way up to a position of leadership in the prison amongst the inmates, right? Being the good inmate to adopting Andor's defiance, and ultimately he becomes a leader, right, of a rebellion within the rebellion, right? He becomes the leader at this prison. He becomes the voice telling everybody what's going on, encouraging them to climb one way out. You either die or you flee, or you die fleeing, but either way we're all dead, so let's try and get out of here, kind of stuff. Like all those deep and meaningful statements that he makes to motivate everybody. And again, at the end when he says he can't swim, it's again a heartbreaking kind of thing. Like it's like, here's the guy, he finally gets his shot at freedom. They're all the inmates are escaping, right? They've broken the system. They've won their freedom, at least temporarily. And he's standing there and he's like, I can't take advantage of this. And and I'm glad they didn't show his fate. I'm glad they didn't show him like being pushed in the water and drowning, or having him walk back into the prison and sit down in a cell and just wait for whatever fate comes to him. I'm glad they left that ambiguous so we can all in our own mind figure out how Kino Loy got away. But yeah, the prison arc is very fascinating because it shows a bunch of different stuff, again, with the Empire, the cruelty of the Empire, the brutality of the Empire. Again, more Cassian Andor. His negative traits are now starting to pay off. And then, of course, tons of great acting. But it's also a really kind of a weird arc because you can make that arc its own show. Like you can make a 12-episode series about Arkina 5 and the prison there, and it would be compelling. It would be like you say, things have been done before, prison dramas and films and stuff. But the way this one was executed would have been fantastic as its own show, especially with Andy Serkis in it.
Before we discuss the final chapter, we should cover the subplots that spread across the entire season. Mon and her family, Luthen and the Rebellion, Dedra and the ISB. Shall we take them in that order, starting with the least dynamic?
Baron's on his way over. He knows none of this. He's not to be trusted. Smile?
The characters surrounding Mon Mothma are, I think, boring, or at least not as dynamic for a reason. Between Luthen and Andy Serkis's character and others, like you get these really strong, emotional, over the top, powerful performances. But when you go to Coruscant, you're dealing with this upper class, political, well-to-do group of individuals, and it's a much more restrained kind of existence. Everything is built on social protocol and who's sitting where and what fork you use and like all that kind of stuff. And so these people don't come across as particularly interesting because let's be honest, I mean, for the most part our political class is extremely uninteresting, but these characters are playing. I mean, Mon Mothma, of course, is the one that we're kind of focused on. She's the one who's dealing with all of the the trauma basically of everything. Like, so her daughter is disaffected with everything because Ermagerd, I'm a teenager or whatever, and her father is kind of just an older version of that. I mean, he's very whiny. He's very, he's just there because his wife is a powerful politician, and he's the plus one in this scenario. He's not the primary actor. They were a part of an arranged marriage. They were married when they were in their early teens, and then they came to Coruscant in their late teens or whatever, but they've been together forever. There's a real possibility here that, and it feels like through the conversations, that they are very much no longer on the same page together as a couple, right? Maybe coming to Coruscant was exciting and interesting for him initially, but his wife works long hours. She spends more time trying to affect some kind of positive change in the universe, while fighting for the rights of the downtrodden and all these things. And he just, what does he do? He sits at home. He's planning dinner parties and shopping, and the question is whether or not he's actually gambling or if that's Mon Mothma setting him up later. But he has a lifestyle of leisure. He's bored, and it comes across. He says it. He's like, "Oh, everything here's so boring. We're gonna have dinner," and he's feeling disassociated from his relationship with her. And he acts he's very self-centered in his outlook, because he never talks about how are you doing, like how is your job, how is your mental health, how are you feeling today, what's going on in the universe. He doesn't even seem to really care about like the Galactic Empire and what it does. He's just happy it's a new government, whatever, things have changed, new set of faces around to have dinner parties with, whatever. Like, he is just so checked out of all the important stuff. He's got a man bun, and look at what she's doing. Look at what her job is. Look at where she's at. Like, she's under scrutiny from the Empire and the Imperial security people, because they view her as a threat to the status quo. And you're like, I want to have a dinner party, right? So anyway, so that's his character. The daughter that is the daughter, she's the rebellious teenager. Her rebellion against her parents takes her into a very strangely conservative and rigid lifestyle, right? She's a Chandrillan on Coruscant, and instead of being with other Chandrillans for the most part, like, being at home on her planet and being surrounded and steeped in that stuff, she's removed from it, and now she has an interest in her culture. And so she's gone and found some like fundamentalist Chandrillan to teach her about the culture of her planet, and now she's turned into this uber strict, super, I guess for lack of a better word, religious, but like very in line with the hardcore traditional values of the planet, the things that both of her parents are kind of like they're done with. Mon talks about the not wanting the arranged marriage for her daughter, wanting her daughter to live a different life and a different path than she did, and even the husband kind of agrees with that on some level. And so she's taken her rebellion, or her formation as an independent person in the family unit, to a level of absurdity, to the point where now she's becoming, of all the things her parents didn't want her to become, right? They can handle the talk back, and they can handle the the entitlement and the whatever, but the one thing they didn't want was for her to become a fundamentalist Chandrillan, and she did. And the guy from the planet, the home planet, I love the dialogue between all of the political actors on Coruscant. Every time Mon Mothma goes into a dinner party, everybody is speaking like double speak political innuendo. Like, every time somebody talks about something, are they really talking about what they're talking about, or are they talking about something else? And so there's all this coded language, and it's really awesome. And I think that like when she's walking her buddy around the party, and she's like, keep smiling, it's like she's dropping stuff on him that's freaking him out, and she's like, don't change, you don't want anybody to notice this, like, this is not the place for you to act like I just told you something subversive, so keep smiling, right? it's fantastic. It is political thriller, political intrigue. It's Cold War spy thriller stuff. It's fantastic, and it's also, it shows how her character kind of goes through this arc of not wanting to fully commit, not fully wanting to jump in, until the point where an accounting issue comes up, right? And so her moving all this money around and paying for all these rebellion causes was going easy until the Empire took over, and then they sent the IRS after her, right? The Imperial Revenue Service, and they found this, or she's found this, 400,000 credit hole in her accounts that she can't account for. There's no receipts, and she's facing an audit, and so now she's pushed into this corner. Meantime, she's stopped giving money out, so Luthen's mad, and he's telling her, like, look, you're in. And she's like, I'm trying to be in, but I'm also trying to be, circumspect, and I'm trying to cover my tracks. I'm trying to do this in such a way where we can keep doing this together. And it's interesting. She's committed on one point to the cause, but she's not committed to the point of recklessness. And Luthen is committed to the cause, and he's committed to the point of, like, I'm going to burn it all down, and I'm going to stand on top of the flames and dance. And he's willing to take risks and make some very bold sacrifices that she's not willing to do. And she's trying to, they're both playing, again, we talked earlier about everybody's version of what does the end of the rebellion look like, or the end of, the Empire look like vis-a-vis the rebellion. So her thing is she's playing this long game, right? She's like, I want to continue to finance this. I still want to be involved. I want to, have a hand in these, discussions and these communications between these various cells, but I need to do certain things and move slowly so I don't get discovered, so I can continue to do this stuff. And Luthen's like, nope, we're hitting the full speed stage now. Everybody's committed. We're all on this ride together, or we're not. And so then there's that tension when, again, the complexity of these characters, right? Mon Mothma is supposed to be a good guy. She's supposed to be, the leader of the rebellion and for all the right things. And to this point, her character, when we've encountered her in Clone Wars and Rebels, she's always made the good, lofty speeches. She's always represented the right moral position to have in the eyes of tyranny and all these things. But we watch her in this show, and you watch her make a very solid political calculation. And she looks around, she's like, my husband doesn't love me or care about me. So I'm going to throw him under the bus and say, well, why are you gambling? Where's all of our money going? Why are you gambling? Like, why? I can't believe you're doing this stuff. Go to Canto Bight. Don't do it here. Blah, blah, blah. Right? Because she knows she's being listened to by the ISB. So she's doing a false flag operation on her husband. And then she's leveraging her daughter's newfound conservative Chandrilanism, right, to cut a deal to get the money back in her account, so that when the IRS, but when the imperial accountants or whatever, when they show up and do an audit on her, there's no problems, right? So she's covering all of her bases. But what's going to happen here is, again, everybody talks about, oh, well, we know where Andor is going. We know how this ends with Andor. Well, you also know how this ends with Mon Mothma by herself on a rebel frigate, talking about how many Bothans died. Okay, but I fully anticipate that something bad is going to happen to her husband. He's going to get arrested. He's going to wind up in a gulag. He's going to be in one of these forever prisons or something. And the scary thing about all of this is Mon Mothma is totally okay with it. Right? She's going to sell her husband out, hand him over to the imperial authorities, marry her daughter off to the son of an organized crime family leader, and then she's going to ghost, and she's going to, like, grab a bunch of her friends and be like, we're going to start a rebellion and I'm out. And that, to me, stands out about, the development of her character in these scenes, where she is so methodical and so political and in her actions, that by the end of the series, in that last scene when we see her daughter meet, the son of the other guy, you fully see her calculate herself into this position of cold-hearted, 100% committed rebel leader. If you want to talk about, Luthen's character, moving in from that, like Luthen's character is presented to us as, like, Cassian is tortured for different reasons, but Luthen is presented to us as a tortured figure. When he gives his speech about what he sacrificed, you talk about a guy who will never experience all of the normal things in life or the joys of life, because he's committed to this cause, this political violence, and he's supposed to be like this. That's supposed to make him sympathetic, and it does in a way, but who the real tortured characters are the rest of the people in the show who have all of those things. They have normal relationships, they have families and careers and other things like that, and you're watching them either have that stuff torn away from them by the Empire, or you're watching people sacrifice that stuff on the altar of the rebellion in order to move the rebellion towards success against the Empire. And it's like all the other characters are the ones that we should have the great pity for. It's like Luthen's a soldier. He's been a soldier since the beginning, right? He hasn't, unless we find out more about him in season 2, from what we've learned, he really hasn't lost anything. What's worse, missing out or having to hand your significant other over to the Empire to keep your own butt out of jail? Lie about their activities, set them up with false accusations, and then hand them over so you can get away. I think that's a little harder than never having to make that choice. And so it doesn't look like there's a lot going on in the Coruscant arc, but there's some really deep waters there, and it's kind of fun. It's almost manic in a way, watching a bunch of people be so polite to one another and so friendly and cordial and social when they're all angling to put a knife in each other's back and try and survive. So again, I enjoy her character. I enjoy her arc. It's the least action-packed, of course, of the whole show, but there's a lot going on there. I think Clea is interesting. She's the one who kind of keeps Luthen together. Yeah, she's enforcing all the mission discipline on him. Like, Bix is frantically trying to make contact with him. Yep. He's wanting to reach out. She's like, "Don't do it, man." And then there's like the whole thing where he's trying to figure out. He's listening to the radio. He's trying to figure out, has anything happened, and all stuff. And he's like becoming really OCD about it. And she's like, "You got to unplug, man. You just got to, it's going to happen. Don't worry about it." And it's very interesting to see, because up to that point, he's portrayed as the master manipulator, the guy that's behind everything, the guy that's in charge. And then you get back to the shop and she's like, gotta keep it together, man. You gotta keep it together. And you're like, oh, okay. So there's a little more going on here, Yeah. But I love the ruse or the cover of the antique shop. Like, I just absolutely love it. Yeah. And again, the double speak and the spycraft that goes on in there, because everybody knows everybody's being watched. It's like the conversation that Luthen has with Clea over comms, which is like, "Oh, did you get the artifact, or did you get the item, or whatever?" And he's like, "Oh, the negotiations were harder than I thought." And it's like, but they're talking about Cassian, right? Yeah. I love that stuff. I think it's great. Again, it's all of this stuff. Listening to Tony Gilroy talk about the writing of the series and the inspirations that he drew upon, and it's really kind of fun because he's a kid in a candy store of storytelling. It's like, okay, I want to write a story about spies and rebels and revolution, and it's like you just grab all these fun things out of history and out of stories of the Cold War and all this stuff, and you just pack it together and produce this amazingly dense and wonderful story about the beginning of the rebellion. And and the stuff that they do, the operations that they run, the way they talk about things, the using of the chalk markers on the ground to guide people to meeting spots and stuff, and it's just all it's solid spycraft, and it's believable even in the Star Wars universe. It's like, of course you're going to use chalk on the ground because the water will wash it away and it won't remain, and like just little things like that, little attention to detail and stuff. Like if you were going to be doing this, how would you do it? Oh, well, how have we done it in the past? How are we doing it now? What would it look like in a future past, like in Star Wars, like that kind of stuff. And again, it all works so well. I mean, it's kind of a nod to Indiana Jones in a way. It's like, you've got this professor who's an archaeologist who is a professor and an archaeologist, but if the CIA needs to send him to somewhere to go get the Ark or whatever, he's a perfect front because he's a scientist, archaeologist guy, whatever, right? It's like a historian. So yeah, I mean, it's like the same kind of thing. Why would powerful people or people with money or people who are traveling from all over the galaxy come to your house? That's suspicious. But not if you're an art dealer, right? Because now people are coming to your house to sell you items. People are coming to buy items, right? People are coming to talk about things, right? And so now there's a reason for these people to be there that is rather mundane and normal. Like rich people like to spend money. They like to have fancy artifacts. Scoundrelly people like to find artifacts and sell them to art dealers. Like this is something, again, right out of day-to-day life. There's all kinds of sketch art dealers. Provenance might be a little sus on it. Like, is that a grave robbing scenario, or did you break into somebody's house and get this, or like where did you find? Well, I found it in the desert. Like, sure you did, But like, there's that kind of stuff, right? So it's like some guy. It's perfect cover. Somebody from somewhere in the universe who has some information or some key stuff to hand off about the Empire also hands you a clay pot. Says, go talk to my man Luthen and tell him what I told you, and give him the pot, right? People are gonna be like, oh, why are you here? Why'd you come in from the Outer Rim? Well, I'm selling this clay pot to this artifact art guy. And they'll be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? And then you go there and you do it and you give them all the info and then you leave. Well, now, yeah, you got this clay pot or whatever, big deal, but you got the info. But now somebody else comes in and says, oh, I'm here about the clay pot. Well, is that code, right? Is that, like, do I need to tell you the thing? Like, guys, it's just... And then it can be perfectly legitimate too, right? Mm-hmm. Like on your Tuesday when you're not actually planning rebellion against the Empire, somebody might actually come in and buy something, and you can just sell it to them, like whatever. It's a legitimate business. And so, again, a great cover, a great front, well deployed in the story. It's fantastic.
So Luthen is your favorite character in Andor?
I think. Character-wise, personality, definitely my favorite character in the show.
Dedra Meero.
Also my favorite person in the show. Different reasons.
You can't have two. You can't have two, sir.
Dedra was recently transferred to ISB investigations and promoted to supervisor. Despite her colleagues' resistance, she managed to gather intelligence that showed a coordinated insurgency across Imperial sectors. Cassian was her best lead, so she set a trap for him on Ferrix. However, she didn't count on the planet's stubborn people to resist the Empire's occupation. As she took stronger measures, including torture and execution, she disregarded the locals' growing resentment. Cyril Karn, disgraced deputy inspector, shared Dedra's obsession with Cassian. He offered his assistance, but she rejected him. In the end, Cyril rescued Dedra from an uprising. Take a few minutes to analyze these characters.
The spunky, energetic, new young girl at the office, learning the ropes. There's a little bit of, office space in there. It's like, you get the managers who want the TPS reports and they want you to do the thing and be in here on Saturday. That would be great. But then it's all within the context of a very evil, totalitarian security bureau that is tasked with torture and espionage and surveillance and like all these things. And yet you still find yourself going, man, I hope she puts that guy in his place. And, she's showing how she's doing so great at her job because her detention numbers are higher than anybody else's. You're like, wait, how many thousand people go into jail? you're tricked or your psychology is manipulated in such a way where you're put in this vignette. Okay, it's an office scenario. You've got this lady who's new. Her supervisors are saying, we recognize your abilities. We recognize that putting you here in this role is going to upset some people. It's going to defy tradition. You have to work a little harder than other people. You have to do it a little cleaner, a little tighter, right? Because people are going to be fighting you all the way up the ladder, kind of a deal. But we have faith in you, but be careful. And then so she does. She goes, she works triple hard. She's pulling the long nights, drinking a lot of coffee out of her Yeti cup, working her assistant to death, right? She's tugging at strings and, following lines of inquiry, and she gets and runs afoul of some people. But then, masterfully defends herself, right? And then at the end, she's torturing Bix and shooting at people and, ordering troopers to fire on civilians that are unarmed in the streets of Ferrix. And you're like, I don't know about that, right? And so, again, the show plays with your emotions and it plays with your brain. Her character is fantastic. A majority of the characters in this show are manically fixated on something, right? Cassian starts off being fixated with where his sister's at. Luthen is fixated on the rebellion, right? And having it be successful. All of the Imperials are fixated on something. The one guy who gets mad at Dedra, he's fixated on maintaining his power within his various portfolios that he's in charge of, and maintaining the status quo in the ISB and putting the noob in their place. She's fixated. She winds up becoming fixated on Andor, but she's fixated on trying to figure out the whole missing parts and stolen goods and trying to connect the dots of the rebellion. It's kind of funny, like when she's talking about the vast conspiracy and that all these things are connected, and Partagas like, are you sure about that? Like, I don't know, it feels like a stretch. And you kind of get that visual from the meme of the conspiracy theorist who has all the stuff on the cork board and all the strings, connecting everything or whatever. It's like you feel like that's Dedra's office, right? Until you actually see it and you realize it's scarily clean and sterile. But you kind of like, that's kind of where her mind's at, right? She's seeing all these connections and nobody else is seeing them, and so she's totally fixated on proving that, which ultimately winds up scooping up the Andor investigation into part of that. On one hand, she's presented almost as a lovable underdog, and then it turns out that you see what this obsession of hers turns into. It's like she's like there's the scene where they're having this conversation, her in the council, as they're coming in to get in for a meeting or whatever, and she's talking about how she sent the doctor to interrogate the guy. She couldn't be there, but I observed remotely. And she's like, and I got to get to this other place so I can have this other, and the doctor's going to meet me there, and we're going to interrogate this other person. It's like she's like running crazy, like all over the place, like doesn't sleep, and she's going to solve this crime. This is going to be her big thing. When she proves all this and catches Fulcrum, she will be the queen of the ISB, right? And nobody will ever doubt her again, and she'll fully have arrived. And it's a fascinating story arc because it's it's something else. We see these people in our lives. We worked with these people. The careerists that are just worried about getting the next position or the next promotion, and how certain human aspects of those individuals get swept aside in the pursuit of that, and win at all costs, and ends justify the means and all that. And so her character, again, it's written very well, and it puts the audience in these weird, uncomfortable positions where we have to assess our initial reaction to the character, because when you're placed in that scene, you're assessing protagonists and antagonists in that scene, that setting, and she's the protagonist, so she's the good guy, right? Air quotes, and so you kind of latch onto her. But then once you've made that emotional commitment to her and you follow her path through the ISB, you realize, oh my God, I'm on the train with the psychopath who likes to torture people. Because there's a moment there when she's got Bix being tortured where you can clearly tell she's thoroughly enjoying the job as an interrogator. Like, it's probably why she joined the ISB, so she could do that stuff legally. But yeah, it's great. I think her character's fantastic. And then Cyril, right? Like, again, he's obsessed, like you had mentioned. He's obsessed with his own failure, but he's also that careerist guy. And this is why everybody thinks they're going to hook up or whatever, is because they're like the same person. But the only difference between her and him is that he had a failure at work early, right? She hasn't failed yet, right? But he failed early and lost his job and got run out, and so now he's obsessed with rectifying that. And his values is he articulates the values. He says the quiet part out loud all the time when he's talking with Dedra. I believe in order and security, and he's like talking through clenched teeth about it. And she feels the same way, but she's smart enough to know that you don't say the quiet part out loud, right? Oh, we're just a law enforcement agency for the Empire, right? That's a nice clean veneer that you can put on it. And he's like, we're gonna bring order and we're gonna crush anyone who stands up against it. Like, dude, you can't say that. But they are the same person, right? He's maybe the more unhinged, but she's wound really tight too. And they almost have a weird inverse arc, because by the beginning of the season, they're both committed, hardcore fascists. And then he fails miserably at work. And his arc goes down, and then she's succeeding at work and her arc goes up. But then to the end of the show, she has the major failure, right? They had the battle in the streets of Ferrix. Cassian gets away with all the people, right? She gets nothing to show for all the death and destruction. And Cyril has his big success because he saves her life, right? And then, of course, it leaves us hanging. We don't know what happens, going forward. But like, their characters' arcs are sort of a mirror image or end-to-end flip of each other, because he starts off low and then comes out high on the end, and she starts off high and ends low. But again, they're the same kind of person. Again, his whole thing about the tailoring, a little extra piping, a little tailoring, he's every mall cop or TJ Maxx security guard you've ever met, who they think because they have a shirt that says security on it, that means that they're a cop and that they can act like a cop and that you're supposed to treat them like a cop, when they're not. And it's like the corporal guys, like, they're kind of cops, but they're not really cops. They're corporate cops, right? And they're not the Empire, right? They're not even deputized by the Empire in a way. They're outsourced by the Empire. And so all he wants is to be legitimate imperial authority. And so he's cosplaying as an imperial officer when he's a corpo cop, right? Just like your mall cop is cosplaying as a regular cop, right? You're just there on the Segway. That's all you do, right? You can't arrest me, right? You can't do any of that stuff, or you don't have those powers. You're not deputized by anyone. You just have a funny hat and a badge. And that's kind of what, in a way, Cyril's character is at the beginning. He's related to the security apparatus in a way. He's in charge of certain things and has responsibilities in certain areas. But what he really wants is he really wants to be a part of that elite imperial security apparatus. Because his attitude, right? He comes in, he's like, everybody's like eating blue noodles and watching TV in the break room or whatever, and he's like, we're working on this until we get an answer. Nobody goes home. Call your families, make alternate arrangements, right? He's like super crazy committed to it. And this is him cosplaying. This is the way he thinks this is the way that the Empire does it, right? When it turns out that he and Deidre are really kind of the anomalies in a way, when it comes to that level of obsessive dedication to the stated causes of the Empire, when a lot of the Imperial people they're just technocrats, right? They're bureaucrats and technocrats, and they're people who are just doing a function. They may not be true believers. They're people with mortgages, right? But he's committed, she's committed, and so his whole thing comes across as like he's pretending to be something else. But when he actually comes to, like we spoke about earlier, when it comes to scenarios where he actually needs to take charge and be that person, he's woefully inadequate. He can't run a fire team in a street battle. He can't deliver a warrant. He can't even give a motivational speech. Like, he can't do any of this stuff, right? He's crap at his job, but man, he's got the belief and he's going to make it happen. And then of course, the whole relationship with his mom and like all that stuff, and those scenes are great, where she's just like talking him down and trashing him and saying he's a loser and causing all these problems, and and just the tortured way that he deals with his mom is hilarious too. And it's like, you kind of almost come out of it thinking, like, does he really want all this because he believes in all this Imperial stuff, or is he just trying to get away from his mom? So anyway, still another great character and very well acted.
The final chapter was a revolt. Ferrix became a powder keg that attracted the main characters. 3 years ago, I was disappointed with the final episode. After multiple views, my disappointment lingers. Marva wasn't a satisfying catalyst, the Empire showed uncharacteristic restraint, and Cassian's friends escaped with relative ease. Season 2 can help by addressing these problems. We should see or hear consequences. To discourage further dissent, a swift, terrible response would have followed. I appreciated the setup, but I didn't appreciate the payoff. What say you?
I wasn't as disappointed as you were with the ending, but it's definitely a cliffhanger, and it feels, like there was some things that probably could have enhanced it to make it more significant in the larger galactic sort of story. Why would we want to go back there at this point? Because all the key players that we care about are gone. It will be interesting to see how that scenario plays out. I know that with the second season there are going to be time jumps, so there's going to be a time jump between the end of this season and the beginning of next season. So when we first see Dedra and Cyril in the new season, it will be interesting to see where they're at. Now we've seen Dedra in both uniform and out of uniform in the new trailers. So whatever happens to her, she is either going to still be in the ISB, or she's going to get back into the ISB. And I don't necessarily think that her being out of uniform is in any way an indication of her being removed necessarily from the ISB. She could be undercover. She could be in a scenario like, well, I guess they technically undercover. I guess it's all undercover, like, plainclothes scenario, whatever, going somewhere. Try not to draw attention to yourself by wearing your, Imperial uniform kind of a situation. Perhaps she's, agent provocateur. She's, maybe she's stirring up the riot that we see, the Gorman situation. Who knows? But I think that the cliffhanger element of the show was not offensive to me as a viewer, knowing that we were going to have another season of the show. Then there was questions, of course, afterwards, whether or not season 2 is going to happen or not. And I got a little, worried. But when they came into the show and they announced it, and then they said, hey, it's going to be multiple seasons. So it's like, I wasn't too worried about it ending on a cliffhanger, because I'm like, oh, they'll pick this arc up, in the next season. But no, I enjoyed the end. I mean, it shows how the rebellion how the rebellion has now started to sort of hit the normies, in the universe, right? So the hardcore committed political actors have been doing this for years, and they've been a very small group, but you're seeing how it's now rebellion, or the idea of rebellion, or the idea of resisting the empire is becoming a populist kind of movement, and everybody's engaging it on their own level for their own reasons. Some people are doing it out of respect for Cassian's mom, because she was, such a well-respected and, prominent member of, the society there on Ferrix. And some people, like the young guy who made the bomb, he's doing it to avenge his father's torture and death. So it's illustrative again of these many parts coming together to be one, and we see it on so many different levels throughout the show. And so I thought that was good. There was action, there was excitement. For the people who claim that the show was boring, it's like, you got all the fun stormtrooper action and explosions in the last episodes there, so it's like, that element was satisfied. But yeah, no, I think it did well, moving the characters around and the pieces on the board to such a way that the audience wants to see the resolution of all this. They want to see where it goes, and which is, in my mind, a very successful completion of any kind of story, unless you're really truly trying to create a one and done self-contained story. Yeah, you want that happily ever after, or right off in the sunset, or whatever, the bad guy's dead, or or we return to the status quo, whatever that ending looks like, for your story. But this story was not intended to end at the end of season 1. So the next best thing you want out of that ending is, are the people who are watching it ready for the next season? Like, are they demanding it? Are they excited about it? And I think it achieved that very well. For the people who made, because there was people who gave up on it because they said it was boring, or whatever. For the people who made it to the end and really appreciated the show, like you and I, we were ready for season 2. We're like, yeah, let's go, because we want to know what happens to all these people. So some of the cool elements of all that, I thought, again, the idea of the being made into a brick was pretty cool. Having everybody kind of return to the scene of the crime, having the play start and end on the same scene or same set, it was a nice bookend to it. I thought it was interesting. Sergeant guy, like, at the end of the show, he's sitting there on the street by himself drinking, and he's another tragic character. We talked about him earlier. He's all bombast, and he's your Billy Club kind of cop, and action oriented and all this kind of stuff. But he also felt, we talked about him earlier. We talked about the scene earlier when he and Cyril were together, giving the speech. The speech is, but before that scene, when they were in the office together, and nobody's taking Cyril seriously about his inquiry into Cassian Andor, and this guy comes storming in and he's like, let's go, like, I'm on board with you, our coworkers have been killed, like, we need to fix this, and it's like he's a kindred spirit, Cyril. Some of that is probably Atticus, right? Some of that is a guy sensing an opportunity to potentially move up, right? But I think, again, on a fundamental level, he's also a believer, like Cyril is, in law and order and security and control and all that kind of stuff. And so that's in my mind why he reaches out to Cyril. They both lost everything they had because of this mission, and whether or not he blames Cyril for it is immaterial, in the sense that he's still invested enough in it to know that if, just like Cyril, if we can turn this around, if we can find this guy and hand him over and show that this is the reason why it all went wrong and this is the guy that should be punished for these crimes and all this stuff, that somehow we can rehabilitate ourselves in the eyes of the establishment, right? And we can get ourselves back in the good graces of the Empire, and maybe there's a job for us somewhere, right? Because he's working in like a blast furnace in some foundry somewhere or something, so he's like gone from being a cop to being, a manual laborer, and I'm sure that he thinks that if he and Cyril can join forces and go and solve this crime and get Cassian, that they can get back to it, maybe not get promoted, but at least get back to the way things were and get themselves back into roles that they would rather be doing, which is, security related. But to see how quickly Cyril abandons him during the battle, because not only is he obsessed with finding Cassian Andor, he's also a little bit obsessed with Dedra. He just ditches his boy. He's like, "Oop, is that Dedra? I'm out." And he takes off, and then the street battle happens, and he gets all caught up in all this stuff, and he probably gets beat up a little bit. And now he's just sitting there on the stairs with his flask, looking sad, because the only person really in the universe, up to that moment, who he felt like either, was his friend, or at the very least was a colleague who had a shared value set that was going to support him, has completely abandoned him. And now, his character, he's truly alone, and the town is on fire. There's dead stormtroopers everywhere, and he's sitting there, drinking and just looking so forlorn. It's really kind of sad. I wonder if he comes back at some point in season 2. I know we didn't see him in anything, but it would be interesting to see him come back and to see him on the side of the rebellion because he felt betrayed. Because Ferrix is a physical set that's large scale, you can have the thing like the parade and the riot happen in such a way that when you film it, it looks real and believable and larger than life and thoroughly believable. If you try to do that in the volume, it would look terrible. I mean, it would look like the speeder chase in Book of Boba Fett. And so that was really cool as well. And again, all the cast of thousands, right? It's like every time you see the streets of Ferrix, it's fantastic because, we're focused on these two characters here who are standing here talking or walking together or whatever, but in the background you have vehicles going by and you have workers and, people, just randomly wandering down the streets and, aliens in the background and people talking. It just feels so layered and rich, and visually correct. You're not getting the Uncanny Valley kind of scenario. Are the people in the background on the TV screen or what is that? So again, all that stuff. And I hope that they come back to Ferrix. I hope that at some point in season 2, there's something maybe, after a couple of rebellion things, maybe before he winds up going back to Yavin 4 to embark on the Rogue One mission, maybe Cassian finally comes back and frees his people on Ferrix, or something, or there's something important there where he can kind of make right by everybody that he left behind. I know he brought out the core people, the core main people, but if he could because he kind of did call down the Imperial Thunder on Ferrix by being a jerk. So it'd be nice to kind of see him be able to come in some way, bring closure to that, and either be forgiven by the people or save them or something like that to, kind of end that, so that he can go out on a high note in Rogue One.
Well, we've talked about season 1 for hours, and we've attracted only modest interest.
Nobody's listening.
Now we'll talk about season 2. Looking ahead, have you pursued rumors and theories, or have you avoided them?
There's most of the stuff that I've seen is just a lot of guess speculation. The only thing that's really kind of nailed down is the Gorman massacre. And the only reason why that feels nailed down is because it's been so prominent in Rebels and other media that's the thing that made Mon Mothma leave the Senate and formally renounce Palpatine and the Empire and all that stuff and leave and join or become the leader of the rebellion or whatever. So they show all the civilians getting killed in the various shorts. So that's really the only thing, speculation wise, feels reasonable. Everything else is just like, oh my god, what planet has the wheat on it? It's like, okay, well, it could be Lothal, it could be other places. People say it's Dantooine, whatever. But again, it's all speculation. I don't really have any strong feelings one way or the other about any of it, honestly. I have things that I'm hopeful to see.
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is what we've been talking about with season 1. If at the bare minimum, this show, it maintains the level of production value, performances by the actors and actresses, storytelling, dialogue, character development, visual effects, costumes, sets. If it stays at the same level as season 1, this season 2 is going to be amazing. It's going to be just as good. It's going to be a hit, right? So what I'm hopeful for is that if there's any increase in quality in any of those departments, right? And I'm hopeful that the story is going to get better in the sense that we have, we've talked about how season 1 felt almost like ending on a cliffhanger, and that there was sort of you had said you were kind of let down by the resolution at the end of the season. You felt like it could have been better. My hope is that situation that you're experiencing with that gets paid off in season 2, and that the cliffhanger is resolved, and that when we do end finally at the end of season 2 with Andor walking into Yavin 4's base to get ready for the beginning of the Rogue One film, that we feel fully satisfied, that this show has come to a good conclusion and that everyone is happy with. I'm hopeful for more character development. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get that, right? Because we're on a journey with these people, right? And we've only seen the first portion of it. And so I'm hopeful that we're going to get, even more about the main characters, that we're going to get more of the lore leading up to A New Hope. I'm hopeful that we're going to see more of the behind the scenes day-to-day Imperial stuff that I love, more of that Coruscant party, more of the ISB, more of the machinations of the Empire and how it's trying to, crack down on everybody. And then of course, the coming together of the rebellion, which I believe we are going to see, because that is something that's already established in the Rebels cartoon, right? And so this is also leading into season 1 of Rebels as well as Rogue One. And so we're going to get a lot of that stuff. We're going to see Mon Mothma quit the Senate. We're going to see the disparate groups of rebels, the various factions of people who are fighting the Empire finally come together and form the larger Rebel Alliance. So yeah, I'm looking forward to all that stuff, and I'm hopeful because we have Tony Gilroy and these people from season 1 who executed so well in the first season that there's no drop off in continuity for that creative team, that when we do get these things in season 2, that they're going to be as good, if not better, in season 1.
What causes you to worry?
Now, what gives me concern about season 2 is the fact that we were supposed to have many more seasons of this show, and that it was originally slated to be 4 or 5 seasons, and that each season was going to take place, with a time jump, and we were going to get even more of those good things that I was talking about, like the formation of the rebellion, the Imperial crackdown and expansion of Imperial authority, more Saw Gerrera, more Luthen Rael, more more Andor going through his stuff and how he rose through the ranks of the rebellion. He alludes to having done many things, in Rogue One, everything I did for the rebellion. He talks about, some of the bad things that he's done. And that crew had been together for a long time, his guys that he took to Scarif. My sadness, I guess, is that we're not going to see any of that because the show is being compressed. And so it gives me concern that what we are getting is going to be either stripped down in the sense that each of these 4 or so 3-episode story arcs that we're going to get in season 2, we're going to be a full season of 12 episodes. So you're going from 12 to 3 episodes. We're going to have to pack a lot of stuff into those episodes in order to complete the story arc, and it's going to feel rushed, unsatisfying. We're not going to be able to, one of the things I thoroughly enjoyed about season 1 is that we got to spend time kind of marinating and stuff. We got to let things breathe. We got to meet the characters and engage with them in their day-to-day and their interactions with other characters. And we could watch their development, and we could spend a little time on the scenery, literally and figuratively. And I'm concerned that we're not going to get that in season 2 because we're going to have to get from point A to point B so fast, so many times that it's going to be stripped down, and the things that we really enjoyed about season 1 could be less present or completely missing. So there's that. My other concern is that Kathleen Kennedy let season 1 be its own thing, right? She was involved. She's an executive producer. She's running the studio. She knows what's going on, but by all accounts, she was very hands-off in season 1 of Andor. My concern is that because of the numbers, the viewership numbers, and because initially people had been so burned out and they had just come off of Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett and all that junk, there was some weakness there when it came to performance that Kathy could insert herself into season 2, and she could try and hijack and direct where the story goes from here, so to speak. Again, I haven't heard anything about this. This is me again. These are my fears, right? These are my unfounded concerns and speculations, but because I haven't heard anything from Gilroy or anybody on the press tour, but I'm concerned that Kathy, being Kathy and wanting to control everything and be in charge of everything and take credit for other people's good work, inserting herself somehow in the production process of season 2 and derailing it, and then seeing a similar scenario of what we got between season 1 and 3 of Mandalorian, where you started off, again, something really strong she wasn't entirely involved in, to by season 3 she's making creative choices and casting decisions and inserting her stuff into the show, and we get Lizzo and Jack Black, as the prime example of what went horribly wrong with that show. So those are my big concerns, for season 2.
I'll ask a few questions to test your powers of prognostication. Are you ready?
All right.
Will Luthen survive season 2?
I hope he does, but I don't think he will. And the reason why I say that is, one, his character appears nowhere later on in the lore, right? He wasn't in Rogue One. He hasn't been in Rebels. Clearly wasn't in Episode 4. Doesn't show up anywhere else later on in the Rebellion in any way. He was conspicuously absent in all of the trailers and production material that's come out here for season 2. He has 1 or 2 scenes. Other characters are more heavily featured more frequently, like Mon Mothma. So that to me would indicate that he doesn't survive season 2. I hope he does. I hope he does get to see that sunrise that he talks about, but it's probably not going to happen.
Will Dedra and Cyril end up together?
Probably. Their relationship in season 1 was very disturbing. Cyril develops like an obsession with her. Clearly, he's into it, and she's not so far. She's threatened to arrest him a couple of times if he touches her again, and if he shows up at her work again, she's going to, put him in a hole for a long time. And yet he saves her life at the end of season 1, and she gives him that look, and I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know what it would do to those two characters and their part in the story. What I have a suspicion that Dedra's obsession with Andor is going to burn her down in the ISB, and that the ISB is ultimately going to be her downfall, not Andor, not the rebellion. It's her failure to capture him at work is going to be her downfall. Now, maybe Cyril's tied to that. Like, maybe he latches onto her star thinking that they're going to rise together. She gets memory hold by the ISB or whatever, and he goes down with her. I don't know. That could be interesting. But I don't know. I don't fall strongly on the side of like, I want to see it happen. And so I don't know. Does it happen? Who knows?
You may only ship one. Bix and Cassian, Cinta and Vel, or Dedra and Cyril.
Bix and Cassian, if it happens, it's doomed to tragedy. He's done the decent thing, right? He paid her the money back. He saved her. He broke her out of the Imperial Hotel, saved her from future Dedra encounters. So I can see that developing between the two of them again. Like, they're on this new planet full of wheat and happiness, and they got the emo droid with them, and it's like happily ever after. But something's got to go wrong, right? Like we've seen in the trailer, they get found on the planet wherever they're at. It would be very Shakespearean, but I'd hate to see them get back together, be happy for a moment, and then have that happiness destroyed, and ultimately be another motivator for Cassian and his activities as a rebel. Val and Cinta would be interesting, simply because, they're on the rocks now. We're starting to see Val kind of go through a character development thing, where she. And I mentioned this before, like she was kind of like the rich girl who didn't really have a lot going on. Clearly, her sexuality is an issue on her home planet because they're a very traditional society. So she's off experiencing the world, and she was LARPing as a terrorist to have a relationship with this woman. But this woman's like, no, I'm a terrorist, right? Like we're either doing the mission or we're not doing anything. And so she was very committed to the cause and committed to fighting the Empire and all these things. And of course, she has all this trauma in her background with how the Empire treated her family. And it would be interesting to see if maybe Cinta starts to soften and realize that there's more to life than just killing stormtroopers, and sort of meets Val halfway. We've already addressed Cyril and Dedra's situation. Like, what would that relationship even look like? Because he's getting very borderline stalker, break into your house at night, rifle through your underwear drawer kind of level of obsessed with her. And I don't think I really want to see that play out on screen, at least in a Star Wars show. It's an uneasy partnership. He wants to get with her. She doesn't like him. And if you keep it at that could create good content for the show. So I think Val and Cinta is probably by default the one that I would want to see, simply because it has good story potential that wouldn't derail the overall arc of, or the overall storyline of Cassian Andor becoming the quintessential rebel.
Will Cassian's sister ever be mentioned again?
Mentioned, maybe. Will we ever find her or meet her? No. And I only say that because of the short nature of season 2, and season 2 being the final season. I think that at some point originally, when they were planning 4 or 5 seasons worth of television, that the sister story arc would have been addressed and wrapped up. There would have been closure. And I think that it could have been done in such a way to motivate Cassian even more to be a rebel. He could discover that she was killed or something, or finds her and she tells him about all the trauma and abuse she's received at the hands of the Empire or something. But because we've had all this stuff chopped, and because we've lost 8, so potentially 32 episodes worth of TV, I don't think we're going to get anything more than maybe a passing reference. He might say, I always wanted to find my sister or something like that, right? It's like, but it's never going to be a conversation between characters, or that he comes across her grave, or he sees her picture in a newspaper, or whatever. I don't think it's going to be a thing. So it may be a passing reference, but no actual resolution to that.
Fill in the blank. I'm most interested in a meeting between 4 options: Cassian and Dedra, Krennic and Mon, Bix and Dedra, or Cassian and K2.
The most interesting to me would either be Mon Mothma and Krennic, or Bix and Dedra. For Bix and Dedra, I think you could really have a delicious revenge arc with that. Maybe strap on the headphones on Dedra and make her listen to the screaming dead children, or just a throw punch or something like that, where she gets back at her for the pain that she's caused. That could play out well, as long as you don't, over the top it and overly girl boss the whole situation. But that could be a satisfying kind of thing. Having Krennic show up and do one of these wonderful political conversations like they had in season 1, where everyone is dancing around a topic and using coded language. Krennic threatening Mon Mothma in that way, in this scenario, at her daughter's reception or whatever. Like, that's very Godfather 2. Clemenza showing up, complaining about, whatever, but like going into Michael's office and making a demand of him, kind of a thing. And the governor who comes in and gives him all the business. Like, that could be a thing at the wedding. Krennic basically shows up as the imperial representative at this wedding. We have a senator. This is an important event. The Empire wants to be here. Wants, in that really great, way that they sort of handle a lot of those coded conversations in season 1. I think that could be a really fascinating interaction between two people as well.
Which is it?
Oh, I'm gonna go because I don't want to see my Dedra get hurt. So I'm gonna go with Mon and Krennic.
Our review and preview show has come to an end. As always, thank you, Sean.
I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old.
Viewers, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Sean and I will discuss Season 2's premiere next week. We would enjoy your perspectives, so leave a comment for us. May the force of others be with you.
Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, by rights reserved. Galactic Initiative is a registered trademark, and other product and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Use does not imply affiliation or endorsement.